University College. Good morning and welcome to our second MLA lecture on the topic of the modern university. Last week, as you recall, those of you who were here, Bob Wilfenberg helped launch the series with an engaging talk on the ever-modern university, reminding us that many of the historical and contemporary aims of the university converge as they address complex modern questions. He also pointed out that the liberal arts in particular have much to say then and now about the vexing, universal, and timeless issues that we wrestle with. This week, we're broadening the discussion. Let me frame it this way. A sampling of the articles in this week's Chronicle of Higher Education, the weekly newspaper for higher education geeks like me, includes, in a poison city, what can a college do? Why nudges to help students succeed are catching on? The improvisational president. The self-obliterating professor. And the one perhaps most clearly relevant to today's lecture, MIT Dean plans to start a university without lectures or classrooms. If there is a common denominator here, and I believe there is, it has something to do with the way that our institutions of higher learning are challenging and changing approaches to teaching and learning, even approaches to the basic structure and purpose of the university. In other words, innovation. At Washington University, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, historically and now more than ever, is at the center of the innovation charge. In the classroom, in the students' living spaces, and in all other spaces where thought and reflection about connected learning matter. We all have difficult time-consuming jobs, but this one has to rank at the top. Jennifer Smith, Dean of the College, probably more than any single leader here, is responsible for creating a comprehensively healthy campus climate for all students, even before they set foot on campus and long after they graduate. And that's no easy feat. And needless to say, today there are many important challenges about what kind of climate to create and for whom, and how to build and how to sustain the services that support students' intellectual and emotional development. At Washington University, Jen not only approaches this daunting task from a perspective of innovation, she also approaches it as a fundamental theme of a liberal arts education. You're about to hear more about that, about some of the innovations that Jen has helped to generate here, and about her observations and recommendations going forward. And having the privilege of working with Jen, I can tell you that she'll raise and prompt you to raise more questions than quick answers and resolutions about this very important topic. Jennifer Smith received her master's and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and her bachelor's from Harvard. Following a year at Harvard as a lecturer in the Department of Anthropology, Jen came to Washington University in 2002 to join the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. Her research has focused on the role of the physical environment in shaping human societies in the archaeological past, particularly where water resource availability was a critical issue for human populations. This work has taken her to Egypt, Sudan, Syria, Iraq, Croatia, Bolivia, the Canadian Arctic, other places, and thankfully, always back to Washington University. In 2005, Jen received the Outstanding Graduate Faculty Mentor Award from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. She was promoted to Associate Professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences in 2009 and became Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences on July 1st, 2012. And directly to the core of today's lecture, Jen was one of 9 Americans selected as an Eisenhower Fellow, and as a part of that fellowship, she spent a month in India learning about innovation in higher education. So please join me in welcoming Jen Smith, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, to talk about the intersection of innovation and liberal arts, educating to innovate the liberal arts in the 21st century. Jen.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much. So welcome. I will try and restrain myself. This is my favorite thing to think and talk about. So hopefully I'll stay somewhat on track. As Steve mentioned, you don't have to look far for criticism of the value, quote unquote, of a liberal arts degree. These are about a year old, but you can go, any news search will find you a panoply of headlines talking about either why a liberal arts degree is no longer valuable, or on defense, talking about just what the value of that liberal arts education is. So we're often playing defense with the liberal arts. We often find ourselves kind of called to defend this idea of a broad education that the liberal arts represents. And what was really interesting to me during my time in India, what I was really interested in, so Steve mentioned some of the places that I've worked. And I started working in Egypt in 1997. And at that time, each village in the desert oases had one central telephone office. There was one telephone in the whole village, one line. And by the time my last field season there was in 2012, everybody was carrying cell phones. And these villages never got landlines. There were never phones in it, landlines in every home. Rather, we leapfrogged. Egypt leapfrogged from this one central telephone office to everybody having cell phones. And I was interested to the extent in which India was going to be doing the same thing as regards higher education. They have 1 billion people to educate. And so it's a great opportunity for innovation in the form and style of higher education. What I found, interestingly enough, is that in response to the concerns they're having over training a lot of technical workers, but not the next generation of entrepreneurs or innovators, really every time I went there, they were quizzing me about the liberal arts education model in the US, and a lot of the goals ended up being that they wanted a system that looked a little bit more like ours. And I was saying, oh, maybe you want to shoot for the next thing. But this issue of liberal arts in fostering innovation is something that does come up worldwide. But the questions that we deal with day to day in talking to students and talking to parents, I give a lot of presentations for admissions, and people really do get at this question of value of the liberal arts degree. And so some of the challenges that a liberal arts education is facing, working with increasingly career-focused students, and I'll show you some data on that, to help them find what they love, find and develop their passions. But we're looking for both of these things, right? I don't in any way mean to diminish the importance of coming out from your college education ready to be gainfully employed and a productive member of society, and not go and necessarily live in your parents' basement forever and ever. That's always, when I talk to parents, they're always very happy to hear that we do care about that. So how do we respond to basically market demands while not losing the core of who we are? Because most of us who are here as part of the institution, in the faculty and administration, we're doing this because we genuinely believe in and love learning. We love knowledge, we love discovery, and that focus is different often from the focus that brought us to this place. So I'm going to talk about a number of tightropes that we're always walking in trying to talk about and craft the liberal arts experience. So it's this tightrope between the utility of the product that we're providing, and even calling it a product, experience is something I prefer, and the intrinsic value of that education. And as I just referred to, most of us, many of us who are here in academia, we're here because of our just inherent belief in the intrinsic value of education, that learning is a valuable experience in and of itself, without necessarily focusing on that utility. However, we clearly need to, given the talk that is prevalent, we clearly need to do a better job of making a case for the utility of our style of education. It's pricey, takes a lot of time, and we do indeed ask students to study a wide range of things for which the utility may not be immediately obvious. So how do we make that case for utility without undermining or losing just the joy and the intrinsic value that we believe is in our educational model? And I'm kind of the poster child. I can make a good argument for utility. In many ways, I'm the poster child for the utility of a college experience. So not only did I majored in geology and became a geology professor. I probably day to day use more of my undergraduate material that I learned in my undergraduate classes than nearly anyone else. I mean, direct correlation between what I studied and then what I taught and what I used in my research. But again, Steve mentioned a bunch of the places that I've worked. Those experiences trying to run field science projects all around the world did actually mean that much of what I took as a part of my broader liberal arts education, beyond what I took for my geology major, was indeed directly utilized by me in the course of my basically doing my job. So I can tell stories about the time I was in Cairo trying to get a visa to get into Sudan, which they don't give easily to Americans, and getting quizzed by the Sudanese consul in Cairo about my knowledge of Islam or my knowledge of the US media versus the European media. So I ended up having to make use of the religious studies course that I took. I've ended up having to make use of some of the history and international relations that I studied. And I always like to say the one thing I really do wish I had studied was some vertebrate anatomy, so I had some hope of understanding what some of the meat I was eating actually was at one point. So I definitely can make the case that you never know what will come in handy. You never know what you're studying, how that will come back around to be useful to you later on in life. But there's a piece of me that hates making that argument because it's still grounding the value of the education in its eventual utility. So that's kind of the tightrope that I'm talking about. How do we communicate to students, yes, indeed, you can do a lot of different things with this education you're getting, but that's not the only reason to do it, that it's more than the pieces that you will use to get yourself a visa at some point in time. So this question, something that's pretty different, at least from when I was in college, and probably many of you are in college, the answer, why should I go to college? So here's one cartoon answer. That this resonates, I'm afraid, a little bit more with our students than I would like it to. So I have these dinners where I invite students over. I do this 8 to 10 times a semester, actually. I've totally got it down. Over breaks, I fill my freezer with casseroles and then just pull them out. And I feed 10 students. I can do gluten-free. I can do lactose-free. I got it all covered these days. So I bring 10 students and a faculty member over. And the faculty member chooses a topic of conversation. And the only rule is that the conversation topic cannot be tied to the professor's research. So we're not doing I'm the expert, I'm going to lecture you over dinner on my particular narrow area of expertise. The faculty choose just things they think are interesting. And we have usually pretty interesting and wide-ranging conversations that sometimes stick on topic, other times don't. But we've done everything from what do you think the value of a liberal arts education is, to U.S. foreign policy, to really one of the most interesting, we did it twice, is there a moral equivalency between athletes' use of steroids or performance-enhancing drugs and the non-prescription use of ADHD drugs by students in academia as performance enhancers? That was a really fantastic conversation. Nonetheless, at one of these dinners, I asked the students, why are you here? And they went around the table, all 10 of them. Every single one of them told me why they'd chosen WashU. And I just let them do this. And then I said, no, why are you in college? And they looked at me like I was crazy. It's not a choice. It's not a question. It's what you do. And that's something that I don't know that we all necessarily, in terms of faculty and administrators, have processed in the way we interact with our students. That for many, college comes after high school the way high school came after middle school, and it is the step to graduate school, I'll show you some data on that as well, as opposed to a commitment to your education and a curiosity about the world. And so, okay, again, I do live in the real world. I understand students need jobs. The bachelor's degree has become a basic credential for probably more jobs than it should, but that's a whole other conversation. There's not a sense of purpose larger than getting on to the next step for so many of our students in college. And so I think that's something that when we think about what a 21st century liberal arts degree is and means, we have to keep in the back of our mind that we're working with a population that doesn't necessarily feel that they have elected to be here. They're not necessarily here for the fun of learning. Now, I'm going to make a lot of generalities, both about faculty, about students, about administrators, and every single one of those that I make, I can cite you 10 off the top of my head counter examples of people who are utterly different. Nonetheless, I'm going to make some generalities about where faculty and students often are these days, but just understand I know their generalities, and hopefully you will as well. So we struggle with this understanding of the purpose of a college degree. And I think in some respects, until we answer that, we can't really go further in terms of design of the college experience, because, well, what is it for? So this just came out. So every year, except sometimes data doesn't get collected, I believe it's UCLA surveys college freshmen and asks them a series of questions. So we have trends through time in some attitudes of college freshmen. And so this particular question, so we've got, hopefully you can see, I know it's a little bit small, so 1988 down there, 2015 here. And students were asked in deciding to go to college how important a reason was to get a better job. And these bars indicate the percentage of students who indicated very important reason to get a better job. And so you can see we're roughly steady over the last 5-6 years, but no coincidence, post-2008-2009 economic recession, that need to get a better job has become very important to more than 80% of our college freshmen. That is a very important reason for them to go to college. And I think that's something that, again, we need to be keeping in mind when, I mean, my instinct, again, I would stay in college forever if I could. I would take, I love it. I would just keep doing it forever and ever and ever. And so, again, I have to keep in the back of my mind, some people are kind of looking forward to being done after 4 years and really are heading towards something else. So this is, for me, good news and bad news. There is. I've been already kind of talking trash about the intrinsic motivation for education of today's students, and that's not the case. Over 70-ish% find it very important to gain a general education and appreciation of ideas. And what's kind of cool is that fraction has been coming up as well. I mean, roughly, it's loose over the last few years, but we do at least, thankfully, still see that students are coming to college to generate an appreciation of ideas. But of course, that is not a very important reason for anywhere near as many students as getting a better job was. So it's still second. It's not unimportant, but it's second. And then in terms of college as really just now being the next step, being 2 decades ago's high school, leading on to college, we're now at a point where more than half, 60%, and it's come down a little bit, but 60% of our college freshmen are planning on more school at this point, which is a pretty high fraction, I would say at least. So not only is it that you have to get a bachelor's degree to be able to get a good job, but actually the bachelor's degree is now just the prep for the graduate degree, which is really going to get you the better job. So kind of the positioning of college in a student's life and the meaning of college in a student's life, I think has very much changed. over even the last couple decades. So these aren't huge changes, but nonetheless. These students are also asked about their life goals. And so this is looking at what students, these same students who are telling us why they're going to college, what is very important or essential as a life goal, being very well off financially, not just well off financially, being very well off financially. We have hit a high. 82% of our college freshmen consider that very important or essential. Having a meaningful philosophy of life, less so, 47%, but holding steady for the last 20 years. It was more important, and actually if these data, my understanding, if you go back into the 60s, it was super important. It was considerably more important than 68%. But these more existential goals, and these are things obviously that we speak to quite significantly in the liberal arts, are somewhat less valued than they were at one point, but more importantly, less valued than the path to economic success. Here's the fantastic news. I love this one. Very important life goal, helping others who are in difficulty. We're seeing the civic-mindedness and the engagement of our college freshmen is absolutely skyrocketing. So hopefully there's some kind of connection there, like I'm going to be really well off financially so that I can help other people in difficulty. I don't know, maybe that's the link there. I would like to think that, but it's very obvious in the last 10 years that we've seen a marked increase in students who are looking outward. So not just looking inward and going for that very well off financially, but also concerned about the contribution that they're going to make. So why am I giving you all of this? In large part, the higher education, liberal arts education, we're reinventing ourselves to some extent around where we want to go, but we have to understand where our students are at. And that's the piece that we need to be messaging in ways that students can receive if we want kind of a real path forward. So to get it a little bit more personal, that was fairly impersonal survey data. What about our students? What about Washington University students? So I do this every year. This is from this past year. So class of 2019, our current freshmen are the class of 2019, born in 1998 at this point, or no, 2000, dear God, they were born in 2000. And so no, not quite, I'm almost, but anyway, we're almost there. During orientation, I ask each of them, so I meet with all of them, and I ask each of them to write or draw on a square of fabric what they hope for themselves over the next 4 years, what it is that they hope to achieve, and then we stick them all to a board and it goes on my wall, and it helps remind me every day when I come into my office why I'm there. It's to help these students mostly get to what they achieve, but sometimes it's to kind of change what they hope to achieve for themselves. Every year I have to throw a couple of these out because some young teenage students are a little bit too honest about what they hope to achieve for themselves. Nonetheless, most of them are really, really interesting and really affirming. So this should give you something of a sense of the diversity of what our students are looking for. From really specific career aspirations, I want to have a solid foundations of studies of law so I can pursue a career in that field. That's that classic outcomes focus, like I am on my way to the next step, or even more specifically, 3.5 GPA and good score on MCATs. Like, come on, kid, you could shoot a little higher than a 3.5. Come on. So the more specific, I love this one, improve the world somehow. There's that wanting to help. That outward focus. Some that are interested in their own balanced life. So balance, work, and fun. This is, we could do a whole other talk on the culture of busyness, which has infected not just adults, but also these poor college students who have been put through the ringer in the college application process. They are living the cult of busyness just as badly or worse than many of us. I mean, I'll have a student who'll contact me and say, can I come meet with you? I'm free Tuesday from 10:30 to 11. It's like, okay, I have kind of a busy schedule too, kid. but they're insanely busy. So they're already worried about balancing their life. I have to admit, I like the feeling of infinity. But people are focused on career. People are interested in happiness, success, passion. I want to save the planet through science. So yeah, there's a lot of ambition there to help others. There's a lot of specific career ambition. So it's all these things that we're seeing in the surveys. We have a pretty good snapshot of them in our incoming class. By far the most common theme amongst our students is this one: find what I love, study something I love, passion for blank, gain an understanding of my interests and passions, fully explore my passions, find my purpose, discover what I love, find what I love, be inspired, find a passion, find my passions, discover what I want, discover what I love, find my passion, find my passions, expand my horizons and find my passion, find something I really care about, find what I'm passionate about. This one kind of hurts. To make sure my passions are right for me. Like, no, come on, your passions are your passions. But then also eat a lot of Mongolian barbecue. So awesome. I'm actually afraid that around here, like exploring new passions might be easier than eating a lot of Mongolian barbecue, because I'm not sure we have that many good places for it. Nonetheless, we do have a lot of students who are looking to explore and who are looking to find something that resonates with them, find something that will be fulfilling for them. And this certainly is an area where the liberal arts education, with its breadth, is uniquely well suited to helping students to find themselves, basically. I do like to tell them now, because you hear this so often, find my passion, find my passion. This is what I do during orientation now. I ask them to revise their college resolution from I will find my passion, because I think the use of that word passion has set the standards a little bit too high. Because I've started getting, over the last few years, students coming into me and saying, like, well, I'm really enjoying my studies of history, but I don't know that it's my passion. It's like, I think they're expecting, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't do anything but think about history. And if they don't find that, they haven't found their passion, and therefore they're going to keep looking. So I kind of say, like, no, don't worry about passion. Just find a really good friendship with something. Find a really good friendship with a topic. If you can stay interested, if you keep wanting to come back to history, if you keep, even when history throws you a loop and it was really boring one day and you came back the next day still interested, totally good enough. You don't necessarily need to focus on passion. So that's my little, I'm tired of that word, and I'm tired of the expectations that it sets up for students. So trying to prime them not necessarily to shoot for this perfect, all-consuming passion, but find something that they genuinely do enjoy being engaged with and could be happy doing for quite a while. So that's a little bit of a tangent. Partially, I like the orangutan and the baby cheetahs or tigers as well. Okay. So I've been referring kind of to this tightrope number 2. How do we both meet students where they're at? And where they are is very outcomes focused, very credentials focused, very busy, very stressed out, very afraid of failing, and failing means basically a B+, very afraid of anything that's not perfect, risk averse, but wanting desperately to find something and to make a difference. I'll see that one all the time as well. Help someone, make a difference. How do we meet them where they're at? And then this other side is very charged, and I couldn't come up with a really good way to say this. I put get them where they need to be. I could say, but who decides where they need to be? And in this context, I'm just going to be unashamed and say, yeah, us. How do we use the college education how do we achieve our goals for our students? What are our goals for our students, you may say? Yeah, absolutely, we'll get there. But where do we balance appealing to what they're looking for out of a college education when we're afraid that doing so, I want to get a good job, is selling them short? If that's all they're getting out of college, just the next step, the means to the decent paying job, at least from where I'm standing, we have not done them a service. They have not gotten out of this experience. I want them leaving here with bigger minds, just open to a realm of possibilities. Those are my kinds of goals. And so where do we, but if I just come straight in as like, I want you to love learning about everything like that, yeah, I'm not going to get anywhere with them. So how do we balance that appealing to, and so this is going to get to that utility intrinsic value. It's kind of the same tightrope again. How do we demonstrate utility, assure them that they will get what it is they're looking for, while encouraging them to look a little further, to hope for more than a 3.5 GPA and a decent MCAT score, but rather to come out on the other end of this as a fuller person, as somebody who is more aware of the world, who has different ways to connect to the world, who understands different people. There's so many possible outcomes that are so much bigger than, and not instead of, preparation for a productive career, but on top of preparation for a productive career. So how do we do that? So basically, day to day, we're working with students who are worried about GPA, worried about income, worried about MCAT, worried about finding their passion, and many days just worried about finding their phones. And I'm over here going like, yes, I want you to take on the world and lead and create and do all this awesome stuff. So I've been out here at 30,000 feet kind of waving my arms around values in the education. But bottom line, day to day, these students are sitting in class, here's somebody's class schedule, and I'm working with things like the curriculum. So how do we translate this, how do they translate their life goals, and how do I translate my hopes for them? How do we break that down into a day-to-day experience that is fundamentally about taking classes and fulfilling requirements for a degree? Can we connect those things? And that's challenging in some respects. Not all, but it's an interesting challenge. And it goes back to one of the fundamental ways I believe that we do need to be innovating. And these are conversations that we're having a lot, is what a liberal arts curriculum looks like. What you've got here is our current curriculum, and it's a fairly traditional liberal arts curriculum. So these 4 areas are areas in which all students must take several courses. We've got the kind of triad of disciplinary areas, the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. And then we've got language and cultural diversity as the basis of those areas. So what we're basically saying, we're structuring a college experience that values breadth. We say we want you to take a little bit from over here and a little bit from over here and a little bit from over there. Is that the way that we do all of these grand things we're hoping a liberal arts education will do? Create the next generation. Is that how you create the next generation of leaders? Is that how you train students who can take on complex interdisciplinary problems, who can work on climate change, who can work on poverty, who can work on inequality, who can work on transmission of diseases, public health type issues? That's a good question. And I think what we're kind of trying to work through at this point is we do believe that that breadth of education is key in providing students with the kind of not just mental flexibility, but different perspectives and frameworks for engaging with the world. So yes, if you know how a historian views the world, if you know how a physicist views the world, if you know how a French literature historian, I said history again, sorry, how an art historian sees the world, you have an understanding that there are different ways, different frameworks, different perspectives that you can address the particular problem that you're facing. But what we do by structuring the education this way, it assumes that ability is just going to kind of fall out of, that, if we just expose our students to all these things, they'll become aware of how to do that, how to switch perspectives, how to switch frameworks. And I think that's where we really need to think about how do we take that broad education the next step and make it not just, will a student happen to make a connection between the religious studies class they took in their first year and an archaeology course they took in their third year and a classics course they took in their fourth year? Will they pull those things together and say, oh, these were really just three different ways of looking at fundamentally the same question of Rome and how it is, something like that? Or should we be attempting to design experiences that will help make those connections for students? And this is what we do talk about a good bit. So probably Dean Wiltenberg mentioned or would have talked about the idea that this, at least to me, is nothing more than kind of going back to the roots of what the liberal arts is and was designed to be. So liberal arts, that which is necessary for a free person to engage fully in civic society. Makes sense. So that's our writing and rhetoric, or rhetoric and logic and math and astronomy and music. So this is a medieval drawing of the 7 liberal arts, so the 7 things around the outside. And so we've again kind of got this sense of, if you get a little bit of this, you get a little bit of that, you get a little bit of this, you're going to be nonetheless ready to engage fully in civic society. I mean, and I think that's the piece that we need to focus on, as opposed to you need to know a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And I think it's easy to fall into a place where we are valuing breadth for the sake of breadth and not for that mental flexibility or for those multiple perspectives that it allows us to deploy. And it kind of gets to what I'm calling it, and this isn't probably the right way to frame this, but curriculum versus canon. Is it a body of knowledge? Is it a specific set of content that we want our students to have? And versus, is it a set of ideas, a set of skills, a set of processes, a set of worldviews, which I'm kind of calling curriculum. Curriculum isn't quite, I wish. That's what I wish curriculum were. I think Stanford frames this incredibly well, in that their curriculum asks students to complete courses in areas that represent different ways of thinking and different ways of doing. And to me, that's a curriculum that, at least in the way it is framing itself, gets at some of these larger goals. Now, bottom line, just like any other institutional structure, the minute you have a curriculum, it gets gamed. It gets gamed by faculty who try and get their courses to count for different attributes so that they'll get more students in them, and it'll be gamed by students who try to find the most painless way through the part of the curriculum that they're not that interested in. So, okay, we always, our reality, unfortunately, always falls short to some extent of the goals that we have for the curriculum. But I think many of us, and we're not alone, I mean, like I said, our curriculum looks very, very much like most institutions' liberal arts curriculums. I think we need to stop looking so much at disciplinary breadth for the sake of disciplinary breadth and really look more at modes of inquiry and training our students across different modes of inquiry. And that can be creative expression. That can be, we're going to hit, in general, if you do that, you're going to still end up with your students hitting most of these disciplines. But when we frame it as, you must take 3 social sciences, you must take 3 natural sciences, you must take 3 humanities, it sounds like the priority is exposure to a discipline for the sake of exposure to the discipline, as opposed to that set of frameworks that we're hoping a student will begin to grasp. So these are things that we're talking about very, very loosely at this point. These kinds of changes are hard to make, and you worry in the end that they're incredibly hard to enforce, that we could come up with a beautiful structure, and then basically what's going to happen is that faculty are going to look at it, they're going to figure out how easily they can tweak a course they're currently taking to satisfy the mode of inquiry X requirement, and students will look for the easiest one to take it through. Again, this is a generalization that sounds way too negative, and it is. We have plenty of people that would not do that, but that's unfortunately where these structures often end up leading us. So it's a larger conversation. Do I have the, yeah. So that's bringing us to another one, this kind of curriculum versus canon is you could express it in another way as kind of balancing a focus on content with a focus on process, skill, cognitive ability, those more generalizable things as opposed to the direct content. And the impetus, at least lately, has been towards focusing on process, skill, cognitive ability, but we can't get rid of content. We can't not teach content. First of all, it's necessary. We need to have a common language about with which to exchange ideas, and a number of the concepts and skills that we are trying to build in our students rely on a certain body of knowledge. So we're never going to not convey content. But I think we've moved away explicitly from imagining a college education as a process dominantly of knowledge transfer. I do think we've moved beyond that. We're not just, my role as a professor isn't simply to take a bunch of knowledge and somehow dump it into the heads of my students. I'm trying to foster their understanding. I'm trying to build their mastery of concepts, their ability to use that information. But it's one of those things, much like these disciplinary divisions in the curriculum, that I think it's in the back of our heads somewhere. Well, okay, I'm teaching a foundational geology course, and so I have to cover, igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks and metamorphic rocks and volcanoes and earthquakes, and I have to cover all this content because that's what an introductory geology course should do. It's like, wait a minute, let's rethink. What is it that I need to do with that class? So kind of working this balance, again, not getting rid of content, but shifting our focus more to being deliberate about the way we're using our classroom or course experiences to build process understanding, perspective understanding, mental frameworks, cognitive abilities. That's the next step of evolution of higher education. And not to say nobody's doing that. People clearly are doing that. There is way, way more focus on metacognition, on understanding of the learning process, students being aware of their learning process. But I think we still have a ways to go to understand kind of our purpose as less of the knowledge transfer, the content transfer, more of the cognitive ability building. And this is something that the humanities are fantastic about. Their discussion-based seminars really do help students hone their analytical skills, hone their dialogue, look at things from different directions. We're not quite as good at this, I would argue, in the natural sciences, and that's what I do. So no, it's natural sciences lend themselves, I think, very well to, we have so many classification systems and so many hierarchical pieces of knowledge that I think we're oftentimes not as good at getting at those abilities. And the big driver for, I think, us really needing to make that switch is the accessibility, the massive accessibility of knowledge these days, brought to us by the information superhighway. People, it's the same kind of quote-unquote disruptive technology that people thought, okay, once books are widely available, we won't need universities because anybody can just sit down there and read a book. And it's like, how much more so can you make that argument with what's available online these days? So how do we use the time that we have in a classroom with our students to help them with the pieces that really you can't get from the book or from the internet? How do you evaluate all of this information? How do you find what's relevant? How do you construct a persuasive argument out of those bits and pieces of knowledge? But if all I'm doing is standing up here and delivering a set of content, I'm not giving you much that you couldn't get on your own. So being more deliberate in the classroom about what we're doing besides content, I think, is the next innovation. We can see it. People are definitely doing it. But we've got to get to a critical mass where that's more normal in our classrooms than more exceptional. So yeah, when we talk about the value of the liberal arts education, these are all the usual buzzwords around the stuff that we believe the liberal arts model is incredibly capable, or uniquely capable even, of fostering. But we don't teach a class in critical thinking. We don't teach a class. Well, we actually do teach a class in creative problem solving, but that's okay. We kind of teach one in cross-cultural collaboration. That was a lousy, I shouldn't have gone down that route. Generally, we don't teach, or we don't in our curriculum specifically require classes on these larger skills. So how do we embed them? How do we embed them in the classes we are offering? And again, you know, students have been gaining these skills from the liberal arts education for decades. You can do it without this additional structure I'm talking about. Students do it all the time. But I would say even with our spectacular students, it's the top 10, 20% who just intuit all of this, who say, oh yeah, actually I could view this as a social scientist, or I could view this as a humanist, and it's going to get me to different answers, and maybe I should think about that. Not all of our students can just do that. And I want all of by taking classes in the social sciences and classes in the humanities. So how do we make this stuff, the powerful stuff, the things that you can't argue about the value of these things, how do we make that the inevitable outcome of a liberal arts education, as opposed to the thing that if you're paying attention, you will get? Because if you're not, you won't. You will get some of that content, you'll get some skills, you will not get, and people could argue, you can very easily argue with me on this, I don't think you will get a lot of this without an attention to the larger picture of your education. And so can we look at our classroom experiences, look at our curriculum, and reframe them, redesign them in ways that draw deliberate attention to the fostering of these kinds of skills. So yeah, are we still a little too close in form, I would say, of what we do to an old model that doesn't reflect the challenges of the society and what it takes to engage, for a free person to engage fully in civic life? Are we doing that? Are we there? Obviously, I would argue not quite yet. And we are for some students, but not for all. So how do we take that next step? A good bit of that is going to be looking at just what those learning spaces look like. What do those classrooms look like? And this sometimes gets translated as the lecture is dead. No, the lecture is not dead, and the lecture is not going to die. It can be incredibly, incredibly effective. We have a number of people who are spectacular at getting up in front of a room of 350 people and being that kind of presence and being that kind of teacher that they can work wonders with 350 people in a classroom. So it's not that lecture inherently, in and of itself, is a bad thing. It can be not the best way to generate concept understanding in certain areas or by certain faculty. And so how do we get to the point where not just our spectacular lecturers can be effective with all of their students, but that all of our faculty are teaching to students in a way that their students are aware of those larger skills that they're building on top of the content that they're getting. And this is a place where there's been more and more research done. There's a lot of buzzwords, active learning. There's lots of different ways that we can set up a classroom or structure a learning environment so that, first of all, the student is active as opposed to the passive recipient of information. And yeah, you know, when I teach a large lecture, I ask people questions, and we're interactive. It's not completely passive, but still a learning situation that requires engagement from the students. Yeah, so you're even just seeing changes in design, so-called active learning classrooms where students are working in groups, so classrooms that physically can move from everybody looking up front at somebody who's talking to people working in groups, working on solving problems, then going back to. So it's a very real physical reimagining of what a classroom space looks like. And again, this isn't going to work in everybody's class and for every setting, but it's the kind of thing that we need to think of. Again, how do we make the best use of the time we have all in one place to expand student learning? And then, of course, sometimes on days much nicer than today, The 21st classroom can still, I hope it always sometimes can look like this. So we have a long way to go, I think, there's a lot of wonderful ideas about how to create more engaging classrooms that lead to more student learning, but there's a lot of cultural shift that we're going to need to get things there. So faculty we all kind of tend to teach the way we were taught. Now there's wonderful efforts at educating faculty on different types of pedagogy. Students many times are resistant to some of the aspects of, sometimes they really just want to go and sit in a lecture hall and actually be surfing Facebook rather than paying attention. And so the active classroom forces a consistent engagement from students that sometimes they would prefer we not make them do. So there's work on the culture to enable some of these changes to happen. But to me, I mean, obviously, I hope you didn't think I was going to give you answers. But what I hopefully have done is laid out kind of the path of where I think we need to go to align the education we're providing with the values that we espouse, and really what our students are looking for, whether they know it or not. And I think that's by focusing on these cognitive skills that transcend content. Doesn't mean content isn't important, doesn't mean we don't have to teach any content, but if we get to that point where someone really says, I am a better critical thinker because of my college education, I can speak more effectively with people from different cultures, I can solve problems in different ways. If someone can say that out of the end of their college education, I don't think we have to make an argument for what the value of that education was. So last slide here. There is so much talk around a lot of this. There was a particularly, to me, interesting article in the Chronicle, again, for higher education geeks, as Steve mentioned, that came out last September, and I was astonished initially to read this. So this woman was at Harvard for a while. She's now at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and she trains faculty in what she calls transparent teaching, that is teaching where the students understand what it is you're doing and why you're there. And when I first heard that, I had the same reaction as when I first heard the term evidence-based medicine. I was like, as opposed to, so yeah, clearly in teaching, students should know why we're there and what we're doing. But as I read it, I thought, how often have I said to a class, this is why I'm having you write a paper on this topic? How often have I said to a class, this is why we're structuring things this way. This is why I'm going to cover this and then that. Never. I never do that. And I think many, if not most of my colleagues, don't do that either. And so this idea of being able to speak, I'm not sure how I want to say this. If we are more deliberate with our students about why we're all there and why we're doing what we're doing, I think this message of value, again, you don't have to argue so hard. If students know why, because you'll hear, why do I have to learn this? Why do I have to learn that? Why do I have to? And some of it, yeah, okay, because you need to know this before we can talk about that. Or sometimes we may not have a great answer for every single one of those things. But a little bit more transparency in our goals as faculty and what we hope for our students. One of the most effective mechanisms for this is what's just called backward design on a syllabus. So rather than saying, okay, what do I have to cover? How am I going to spend all my time? How am I going to spend my weeks? When am I going to put the exams? You say, what do I want a student to remember from this class 5 years from now? And you work back from there. And your structure of your class is it's all leading towards that, what do I want them to take away from this experience? And it's intentional. So simply being intentional about our teaching, and again, it sounds crazy, how could we not be intentional about our teaching? But I walked in, I got handed an introductory earth science class, which I was excited about teaching, but what went in my syllabus was what had gone into my predecessor's syllabus and what had gone into the syllabus that I had taken as an intro earth science student, and I didn't think about it. I didn't think about how or why I was conveying the information and the concepts that I was. And so, to me, one of the simplest ways to, again, get back at this awareness of value and awareness of larger level skills is for us to think about just being more transparent in how we're teaching. And that would lead to people, when they leave us, hopefully having a better sense of and becoming advocates for a liberal arts education, because they really are aware of and can articulate just what it is they learned from us over the course of 4 years. So that's all I've got, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. Sorry.
Do you subscribe to the theory that society would benefit if everybody got a liberal arts education?
No. Well, okay. If everybody wanted one, then yes. I've seen, maybe later in life, I've just seen students who really do not take advantage of it. And maybe if they, maybe a little couple of years down the road, or if they came to a sense of the value for themselves, as opposed to, when you make somebody do something, sometimes it doesn't come out that well. So I don't know that this is the answer for absolutely everybody. Yeah, Sally.
I was surprised that you suggested that the natural sciences were at a disadvantage, because from my point of view, one of the ways that we can move toward the goals you enunciated so nicely is to move our students to a point where they are contributing to new knowledge in their field.
Yeah.
And in fact, particularly in the life sciences, the Earth and Planetary Sciences, it's really very easy for us to bring our undergraduates into our research. And when they do that, they find they have to acquire skills in data acquisition. They're usually involved in teamwork. They're involved in analysis. They must communicate their results.
Absolutely.
And I think the sciences have a real advantage, because we have some pretty concrete goals about new knowledge we want to acquire, and we can bring the students into that.
Absolutely. No, and I did not phrase what I was saying appropriately. At that point, I think what I was thinking about in my own head was more frameworks on life, frameworks on interaction, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of the process. Science, through research, through the discovery of new knowledge, gets at that cognitive ability that's absolutely spectacular. I don't think students make the transition all that often to, this is a way I view the world, that they do that a little better in humanities than they do in social sciences than they do in the sciences. So the ability is there, but the consciousness of this being a framework within which you interpret the world, I don't think they quite as easily take that step back to kind of the next meta level of this is one way of viewing the world. I don't know, that's what I was thinking. So it's the ability is generated through very well through research, you're absolutely right. But I think the student's awareness of that as a cognitive framework is just harder. But maybe I'm not doing it right.
Thank you for a brilliant lecture. I agree with you 100%. How do you get faculty to change their bad habits? Now that you're a dean, it's your responsibility.
I know. So there's incentives is one thing. So I have a small grant proposal program where faculty who want to, I call it classroom innovation grants, and if they want to spend some time over the summer working on overhauling the class, changing up their pedagogy, they can apply to me and I'll give them some money to do it. Alternatively, we look at getting faculty connected with master teachers. So I know, it's hard. It is incredibly hard. If money were no object, I tell you what I do. I would have an army of people who had both disciplinary training and pedagogical training and they would be kind of course support, course structure people who could sit down with a faculty member, and the faculty member could say, okay, here's what I would like, here's what I want to teach, here's what I want to do. And that other person could say, how about this, how about that, how about you do this kind of thing. So if money were absolutely no object, because it's tough, and particularly we are a research university. And so our faculty have major demands on their time to run world-class labs, to be publishing, to be getting grants, to be writing books. And the art and science of pedagogy is not something that it's necessarily that easy to master. So I think we need to provide them support. Some people are, we're fortunate enough, some people are naturals. Some people are really, so they're naturals, really good. But how do we get other folks to change? You know, cultural shifts are incredibly hard. I think there's no way I could ever just mandate. I don't have a stick. I don't have, you know, it's not going to work that way. I do think that younger faculty are much more amenable. They've been raised, they're getting training in graduate school, they're more aware of opportunities to teach differently. So it's shifting, you know, the same way as science progresses funeral by funeral. Academia progresses retirement by
I think the
retirement.
young graduate students have more role models
Absolutely.
than I do.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a big endeavor. I mean, and we have fantastic teaching support. It's getting faculty time. Faculty time is the most precious resource. Yeah.
So more fundamental than that. So why are professors the best people to lead us across these three type groups? And what is getting a PhD in the liberal arts qualified?
So I was getting a PhD. So I don't imagine this as falling solely on the shoulders of faculty. Faculty do have multiple roles at the university, and research is a piece of them. I think it's the role of the administration to structure, provide incentives, provide support. It's the role of students really to demand the quality of education, and students to vote with their feet and to move to where the educational experiences are giving them what they are looking for. And ideally, from my standpoint, it's the role of the faculty member to be intentional, be transparent, and pay some attention to these larger outcomes. I think faculty very strongly in their suitedness to doing that, or their inclination to doing that. But what we all have, what that process of getting a PhD, if you made it through, you love learning. If you made it through that process and came out the other end, you value knowledge. You are curious about the world. And that's the piece. In some weird way, we're the embodiment of this thing that not everybody values anymore. But in that case, we are best suited to argue for that model because we're kind of the true believers. That makes sense. I mean, I'm clearly a true believer. And so you can become an effective advocate through that process. It winnows out anybody who would falter. So that's not quite answering the question, but sort of. But I don't see it as fully the role of faculty. They're kind of on the ground in the trenches with students, but some of the messaging and some of the structures, that's on me, that's on my colleagues in the administration.
Your framework in looking at this went back to the 70s and maybe to the 60s a little bit. If you've gone back and looked at the needs post-war, it seems to me the biggest transformation was the GI Bill.
Yeah.
And how that did that. And also looking at the attitudes of the students, they had already changed at the time they stood up. So I think these kids today, we're telling them, don't worry, you'll graduate in 28 years old, and you can change the world. Those kids came in as a result of having already changed it after being all over the world.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I haven't spent too much time looking further back, but I think you're absolutely right. Yes. Yeah, these are all trends. That's another tightrope is, we worry a lot about, there's always buzzwords, like right now, resilience, that students need to build their resilience. And to what extent do we kind of reorient ourselves to focus on some generational issues that generally by the time we figure out how to address, the problem solves itself because we're into the next generation. And there's a new problem. So I think that's the pull to respond to, these students only care about career, and you want to like completely reinvent yourself to focus on that, and then a part of you thinks, just wait another 5-10 years, and it's gonna, the pendulum will swing back. And so it's that continuity versus change, and how can we kind of lead a change and not get trapped into being reactive, yet nonetheless still be compelling to the students who are in our classes.
Yeah, Steve, I'll give it to Steve.
Okay.
We take a class of approximately 1,700 kids out of 30,000.
Yep.
These are some of the brightest kids in the world
Yep.
that get in here. And we have a certain percentage that want to go into pre-med.
Yep.
And yet, a certain percentage of these drop out of pre-med because they happen to get a B. Because they think that they can no longer, they're not smart enough. Yet if they were at any other college in the world, they would be in the very top part. And this is all because of grades. I mean, these kids feel that there's something wrong with them because they got a B or maybe a C. And I know at the University of Chicago Law School, they don't give any grades. And yet the top law schools in the world want these people because they got into the University of Chicago. The top medical schools should want these kids, every one of them, because they got into our university here. Maybe we should change our thinking, because we're discouraging some of the smartest people in the world not to go into medicine because they got a B or a C. I had one student here that's brilliant. He must have an IQ of 160. He spent 2 months in the summer just studying for the MCAT, worrying that he wouldn't get a high enough grade. This kid is so smart that he didn't even have to study for the MCAT. What can we do to not discourage these brightest people to go into the profession that they want to go into without telling them that, making them think that there's something wrong with them?
So, for what it's worth, we do, our pre-health advisors do very much try and dissuade somebody who's going to drop pre-med because they got a B. You can very well still get into a fantastic med school with a B or C or 2 on your transcript. So we try and not let them do that. But that is one of the generational things that we do worry about a good bit is it can express itself as risk aversion. It can express itself as total fear of failure or lack of resilience, inability to come back from failure. And by failure, a B. And I think one thing that's going to have to help us in changing that is actually the college admissions process, because it's really focused on. We had a really interesting. I meet with guidance counselors twice a year to kind of tell them about WashU, and they said, what skills would contribute to students being successful at WashU, and we all of us on this panel talked about the more emotional intelligence style things, the resilience, that kind of being able to adapt, being able to change the way you're studying if studying isn't going so well for you, rather than just saying, I guess I'm not smart enough. It's like, hey, how about you think about changing the way you're doing? And it's okay to fail, and it's okay to take risks. And the guidance counselors all said, well, we can't help you with that message because they're so focused on you can't take risks if you want to gain admissions to a highly selective college. And so we're starting this process of fear of failure, fear of blemish on records, giving up if you're not in the top half of 1% because you're not going to be good enough. Our admission system fosters that on the way in. And so that's something came out from the Harvard Grad School of Education relatively recently about recommendations for changing college admissions. And a lot of that is to respond to a good bit of this, to say, look, maybe don't take 17 AP courses, maybe just take 3 or 4 in the areas that you're most interested in. Try and get students away from this super high stakes focus on every individual grade, and not if you screw up one little thing, forget it. So we are very aware that we've got a problem with that. I don't see us going no grades.
Just pass, fail.
Yeah, I doubt we would do that. It'd be an interesting conversation to have, but I don't see that. Happening. Yeah.
It does seem like that raises the larger point of how to align evaluation with the process as opposed to the content. If that's what you want, if that's what we're valuing in students, how do we?
And that's one of the challenges. Those things that I put up there as skills, those are really hard to measure. Many of them, ability to apply knowledge in a novel setting, or to switch frameworks, those are really hard things to attempt to give a test on or measure directly. And so we shy away from them in part because it's hard to tell whether or not we're achieving what we hope. But yeah, designing assessment for students is it's as much a piece of all of this, and we would have to shift our assessments to being as intentional and targeted to the skills we're hoping to foster as everything else in the class. Now, you're absolutely right, and it's hard, and that's one of the impediments. Not only does it take time, but it's not easy, it's not straightforward.
Could high schools be doing more? I've been thinking this way, or is the concept, is the pressure of college admission prevent that?
I mean, that's a serious impediment right now. At least that's what we heard from the guidance counselors. I think we're very much hoping there's a consortium that's developing a new college application that will engage with portfolios of student work, have things that balance test scores, focus on engagement with family. That if you are putting your time into caring for a grandparent or younger siblings, that's something just as worthy of going on your college application as anything else. So there are recommendations at this point to work on that, because I think we're all kind of horrified that most of our students seem burned out by the time we get them. And it's all of this great stuff that I'm talking about, the inspiration and the joy of learning. It's like, yeah, they got that beaten out of them already, many of them. So it's hard to reawaken. I would love there to be more of an ember of that to fan into flame than some of what we get. Oh, I did a good burning metaphor, right? That was, I'm proud of that.
Jen, quick question. It's loaded, but maybe a brief answer. You've worked hard to diversify this campus. A lot of
Admissions has,
but you've been involved. What kinds of impact does that challenge have on the larger issue of performance, making a more diverse campus?
So, I mean, there is a national correlation between students coming from low-income backgrounds tend to be more pre-professionally focused. So I think that we have an obligation to try and work with that, and it's obviously completely understandable. And I don't want to. I've talked a good bit about career focus and next steps, and those are important, and we do want to be preparing our students for all of those. I don't mean to diminish that. But I think we want to make sure that students who may be pre-professionally focused are still getting all of this value-added stuff on top of achieving those goals that they have for themselves, for their families, that they are able to take advantage of the opportunities that our educational experience provides them during their 4 years here and after, that they consider all possible options and what they love just as much, and pursuing what they love just as much as somebody from more means can. And that's as much an issue of how we communicate with our students as it is with anything else. I mean, more prosaically, we're dealing with differences in learning style and background that we haven't seen as much before, but that's that's a challenge we do know how to address. It's just getting a structure there to address it. So I think it's working to ensure that students have, that coming here is the same opportunity for a low-income student as it would be for a high-income student, that it represents the same opportunity. And I think we have a ways to go to do that.
At Washington University, in the 1950s, there were two different ways for students to take courses in a freshman year. One was to take the distribution in each silo, so to speak, the different ones. But there was also an option to take the different types of courses in a curriculum where there was an effort to pull it together at the end. And I didn't take it, so I don't know what they did. But in those days, things were, catalogs were put in print. So perhaps there is even one of those around.
And that's bringing up, I can't tell you how much I miss, even as an environmentalist, someone who cares about sustainability, I miss our printed course catalogs so much because, there was this opportunity, and I've been trying to get the IT folks to somehow replicate this, but you could be paging through looking for your chemistry course and pass it, no, I was going to say plastics, but that doesn't work because it's alphabetical, but pass a biology course. My brain is no longer working. But there was a serendipity that you could just, your eye could get caught by something on a page, and you could take that class and it could change your life. And now, we have these online course listings, and you click on a department, and it gives you the classes in that department. So you're not going to stumble across a religious studies class by accident. You have to go in and look. And so I've been trying to get the IT folks to come up with something that just randomly shoves classes in students' faces every once in a while. Total tangent. I'm sorry. Yes. We are trying a set of first-year classes that we have freshman seminars and have for a really long time. Those tend to be, they're small group, they're intensive, sometimes narrow, but not always, really deep dives into particular exciting themes or topics. We've also got now 3 or 4 of a new kind of freshman course that are co-taught by faculty across actually our schools that are interdisciplinary investigations of big issues. So we had one on creativity, on designing creativity, and they talked about the creative process for medical researchers, for entrepreneurs, for creative artists, for across the board. And so we're looking at having some classes like that are more deliberate about trying to make those connections and juxtapose these different frameworks and kind of show students how attacking one theme from different directions can create kind of a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So we're experimenting with trying to design some discrete experiences that would kind of do something like that.
If you looked at a first year of studies, which would have you take English, math, science, I know Notre Dame does that, and they even have a swimming class. You have to swim a lap in the pool gradually from the university. Seriously. They dropped that recently.
Yeah, that would be tough for us because we really do encourage flexibility. We do encourage students to explore in their first year, and we want them taking, I always say, I want you to take a class that you never could imagine there would be a class in that thing. That's kind of not, we haven't really gone that direction. But that's an interesting thing to think about. Behind you, yeah.
I know things have changed quite a bit on this campus. I mentor international students, and they tell me a lot about what goes on now. But I was a liberal arts graduate in the 50s and 60s. And of course it was quite different then. They still had a military presence on campus. And there were no international students, there were no black students. And there was a streetcar university, that's how I came. And most of the classes were lectures. You didn't have much interaction with the instructor. There were choices. You could take certain things, but there were lots of things you had to take. And I remember I thought I had all the credits I needed. I was a senior. I was going to graduate in just a few months, and then I found out I was minus something, and I've forgotten what category it was, but I had to take a freshman geography course because I had to fulfill whatever that was. Didn't mind taking it, but I had never thought that I would have to take that. But there were still a lot of things you had to do. It wasn't choices like I think you have probably more now in LA in the liberal arts. Yeah, quite different now.
Yeah, that's a lot of difference. Absolutely.
We should probably let our guest go. The conversation's been very engaging, and the beat goes on. If you want more, next week, same time, Barbara Shaw is in the faculty